Hi, thanks for coming back for more Stories Out Loud. This is part 4 of Each Other's Business. The yoga classes were hot and Terry didn't like the heat, but Mitzi said the heat was worth it. Because when you left the heat, no matter how hot it was outside, you'd feel a freedom that you never felt before. And she was right. For 3 weeks now, 2 or 3 days each, she went to hot yoga and stretched and sweat and put up with the wind-removing pose and the spine-twisting pose and the dead body pose through which she sweat a river and drenched her yoga mat while Eve or Paul directed her attention to the form of her body and the lines she made while stretching and bending. And even though there were 15 other people in the room, and the heat and humidity were overwhelming, and the odors they exuded in their exertions were unflattering, and through the front window hundreds of cars flashed by, many with the rumbling bass speakers that shook the ground, and dozens of people walked past, and many, mostly kids, stuck their faces against the tinted glass and peered into the sanctuary, Terry found that she spent whole minutes of time not thinking of anything at all except her breathing and her body and surviving the heat. Quite often when she did think, it wasn't of Jason or Annie or Derek or Denise. Mitzi referred to them as the double D boobs, or anything of any importance. Once in a while, she'd find herself thinking of work, payroll, or processing work orders, but those were nothing thoughts, almost like meditating. She did, on occasion, worry about something important, despite the concentration, the positions, and the breathing required. Derek had quizzed Jason about her trip to Yato Sky and encouraged him to pray on his mother's behalf, which Jason now seemed inclined to do. It struck her as unnatural that her son was now an intermediary, not only between herself and Derek, but between her and God. Yet even then, when the swirl of her mistakes roiled in her stomach, Eve or Paul recalled her to the moment with their infinitely non-judgmental instructions and encouragement and routine reminders to breathe and to focus on the forces behind each breath. Above all, she was drawn to the sensations she experienced leaving the studio after class. It was a hot June, but the blast of summer-like heat was bewilderingly cool. She felt something better than freedom, which was too small a word, and more like enlightenment, though that word was too large. "It's great, right?" Mitzi said after their first class together. "Yeah," Terry said. "I feel like I'm freezing, but I'm not cold at all." Whatever it was, some middle ground between freedom and enlightenment, it was better than her normal sense of dread or loathing or worry. Today, she was Mitzi-less because she had to pick up Annie. The gift of cooler air stayed with her all the way to the school, a flat brick building surrounded by parking lots and asphalt playgrounds that sat baking in the clear, bright afternoon heat. Annie waited on the curb by the front entrance, her face grim and streaming sweat. "You're late," Annie said. "It's only 2:45, Terry said. "Walkers get out at 2:30, Annie said. "Are you all alone?" "Mrs. Litchfield is right there," Annie said. The teacher stood behind the entrance doors. She waved. Terry waved back and felt the buffer of cool silence dissipate. Annie looked sweaty and out of sorts. Her book bag was too large, packed to bursting with schoolwork and permission slips and artwork and the 2 stuffed animals she wasn't supposed to bring to school, but did anyway. Terry knew. She crammed them near the bottom, beneath the pencil and lunch boxes. She'd come back from her weekend at her father's in an especially quiet mood. She'd always been quiet and always accepting, even when the adults in her life were fighting and noisy. In the divorce, she'd been an anchor, never complaining, never interrupting, nor crying, never growing irritating or whiny like so many children her age. At the custody hearing, she'd been more a model citizen than any of the adults. When Terry told her they'd be sharing a room, she neither cried nor argued. She hadn't even cared which twin beds she slept in. Terry offered her the choice, and she merely stood inside the door and said, "I'll take the one you don't want," sounding mature and resolute, her blonde hair hanging limply tucked behind her ears, her chin solid, her voice a pure and steady, girlish tenor. They'd stood together in the doorway, Mitzi behind them both, looking in on the pale yellow walls and windows without treatments. Annie strong and willing, while Terry reeled at the depressing hue of the room, the sad fact of a grown woman acquiescing the dignity of a private room, an adult room with an adult-sized bed instead of the twin bed confronting her, the grim rectangle reminiscent of a monk's pallet, a step above a pile of straw, certainly, but several steps below the pillow-top king she'd shared with Derek. The one piece of furniture in the apartment that Annie loved was the divan. For her, it was a chair, a bed, a raft, a palace, a sled, a carriage, a car. During the day, Jason spent more and more time in his room with the carpet swatches she'd rescued from the trash and photos of speeding motorcycles, but Annie practically lived on the divan. Annie's stuffed animals lined the divan during the day, and each night after Gary left, Terry carefully replaced the animals. The divan was her sanctuary, too, a place where she could almost forget herself for an hour or so, where she again felt desirable, at least until she looked over and saw the animals strewn across the floor. The bubble of calm filled the car. It may have been Eastern voodoo, which was what Derek told Jason when he told her about her trips to the yoga studio, but there was no doubt that she breathed easier after a class. Annie was the one who looked constricted, stressed, her first-grade face a squished mass of worry. "Bad day," Terry said. "How come we don't have curtains for our bedroom yet?" Annie said. "Everyone has curtains but us." "What do you mean, everyone?" Terry said. "Did someone say something?" "No one said anything. I just wondered why we don't have curtains." "What made you think of your room?" "I was just thinking about it," Annie said. "All day?" Terry said. "I don't know. Just for a while." They drove on in silence, windows down, the ends of their hair whipping about, the soft protection of yoga fading. Terry reached over and turned on the radio. Annie sank back into the seat. Terry could just see the top half of her head in the rearview mirror. "I don't know, honey," she said. "I guess once I pinned the sheets up there, I didn't think much about it. We don't spend much time in the room, so it didn't seem important." "I don't like our room," Annie said. Terry wasn't sure how to respond. The yoga bubble popped. The air was hot. How would she not notice the heat? It was 95 at least. She was drenched through and oppressed by the funky array of body odors, what Eve and Paul called toxic fumes, rising from her pores, released by the locust pose and the cobra pose and the half-tortoise pose. Annie tilted her head back against the seat, her eyes closed, a little Buddha focused on her breathing. Terry said, "Well, I guess I don't like it either. I don't like that you don't have your own room. You deserve your own room, right?" Annie nodded, eyes still closed. "But it's going to be a while before I can save up the money for a bigger place, you understand?" More nodding. "I'm doing the best I can for you, sweetie." Lord, it was hot. The whole world was a Bikram studio without exit. Even with all the windows down, she felt on fire. The sun was directly in front of her, merciless. She drove down Victor Avenue, streets of large houses with long sloping lawns and driveways full of cars worth more than anything she'd ever owned or would own. Her and Derek lost the truck, of course, and her Camry, but they should have never bought them in the first place, or any of the other toys. If her purchases had been right-sized, Annie would have curtains, or at least something other than a shared room with sheets tacked over the windows and a divan as a playroom. She pulled the visor down halfway. The sun irradiated the landscape. All the lawns and houses and richness of Victor Avenue burned flat and white. A few joggers toiled down the sidewalk, their shoulders low, heads down. Even the young mothers, pushing fat strollers with well-fed babies, drooped their way through their afternoon exercises. The best Terry could do was insufficient. She'd taken this half-day so that she and Annie could spend a few hours together while Jason was with friends, just the two of them for a change. But it wasn't enough. Why was it so hot? The air felt as if it were boiling. She smelled the steam just before it escaped, tendrils of vapor licking the edges of the hood. She glanced at the temperature gauge, but it, like the fuel gauge in this piece of shit Honda she bought for $700, seemed to be broken. It sat firmly on the C, not warm in the least. The car began to vibrate and whine, the engine complaining. "Mommy?" Annie said. "I know, dear, I know." She pulled over to the curb. It smelled worse than steam now, like burning rubber, like chemicals. "Get your bag and get out," Terry said. They'd come to a halt near the Tenson house, the nicest, largest house on Victor. The Tensons were well known for their elaborate holiday decorations. On Halloween, everyone trick-or-treated here and received a full-size candy bar passed out by the angelic Tenson children who stood at the front door in matching costumes, arguing over who got to hold the bowl of treats. Terry never understood the hubbub. Standing in line over a full-size Snickers? She suspected people simply wanted to catch a glimpse inside the house. She'd stood in line here many times with both Jason and Annie. When they got to the door, she'd gawked like all the rest, though only the front parlor was visible behind the candy and the well-attired Tenson children. Tenson parents holding hands just past the doorway, all of them hidden behind expensive masks. The parlor radiated old money, with its imported marble floors and its filigreed trims and high-backed chairs and dark bookcases filled with heavy volumes with perfect, uncreased spines. And now her car was dying here, not merely overheated, but burning, a thick coil of smoke rising from beneath the hood, hugging the windshield and curling into the branches above. She took Annie by the hand and led her across the Tenson lawn as the flames grew worse. There was a loud pop, and then the car was burning good, flames snaking from under the chassis. Charred streaks covered the fenders like a rib cage. Soon fire trucks arrived and were spraying foam. A policeman walked toward them. "I'm sorry, sweetie," Terry said. Annie was holding her hand. A crowd had gathered and watched as the foam swallowed the flames. Several members of the Tenson family were standing at the fence, disquieted expressions on their faces. Terry looked back at them and shrugged. "I'm sorry," she said to them, though she had done nothing really. The policeman was close now. Terry squeezed Annie's hand. "You know what, kiddo?" she said. "How'd you like to sleep in the living room tonight? We can take the sheets off our windows and hang them from the ceiling like fancy drapes around the divan. You can sleep with all your friends. It'll be like a little palace." Annie squeezed her hand harder. "I assume that's your car," the policeman said. "Unfortunately," Terry said. "You both okay?" Annie squeezed even tighter. "It's just a car, right?" Terry said. Thanks, everybody. Part 5 tomorrow.